The Beatles touching down in New York City 60 years ago.
And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrienne from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart.
Very few musicians have built a legacy like Paul McCartney has. As part of the Beatles, he shaped the very idea of modern music. But behind the sold-out stadiums and hot-selling records, Paul lives a second life, far from the stage. A life that wasn't defined by his endless fame, but by fatherhood. Raising children while being part of one of the world's most influential bands of all time meant navigating complex feelings, pressure, and expectations that no parenting book prepared him for. His kids grew up knowing the weight of their last time. But while some embraced it, some rejected it entirely. Let's take a look at what really happened to Paul McCartney's 5 children. Chapter 1. Heather McCartney. Before the world ever saw Paul McCartney as a father, he made a decision that quietly defined the kind of parent he would become. In 1969, at the height of Beatlemania, Paul didn't just marry the woman he loved, Linda McCartney, but he also adopted her 6-year-old daughter, Heather McCartney, and loved her like his own. Heather was born in 1962, before Paul and Linda ever met. Her biological father was Joseph Melville C. Jr., Linda's first husband. When that marriage ended, Heather was still very young. By the time Linda married Paul, Heather had already lived through instability, something Paul understood all too well from his own childhood. This adoption wasn't symbolic. It was permanent. Heather wasn't treated as an add-on to a famous marriage. She was Paul's family. That mattered, especially considering the moment they stepped into. The Beatles were fracturing. Fame was turning volatile. And Paul was about to lose not just a band, but his very identity. Yet inside the chaos, Heather grew up in a home that valued creativity over celebrity. She appears briefly in the Beatles film Let It Be and later in the documentary series Get Back as history unfolded around her. Linda shaped that environment as much as Paul did. A professional photographer before she was ever a Beatles wife, Linda believed art should be lived, not performed. Heather absorbed that lesson early. Unlike many children raised around fame, she didn't chase fame. She chased her passion. As an adult, Heather studied photography and printing in London before discovering pottery, a work that required patience, solitude, and physical connection. In 1999, she launched her own housewares line, quietly stepping into the world on her own terms. Paul traveled to Atlanta to support her at the U.S. launch, marking his first public appearance in America since Linda's death the year before. It was a clear moment where a father stood beside his daughter during a special moment. Heather rarely speaks publicly, but when she does, her language is telling. She credits both Linda and Paul not for inspiration, but for stability. After Linda died in 1998 from breast cancer, Heather experienced a loss that reshaped the entire family. Paul later admitted that both he and Heather lost the woman who anchored their life and carried each other through the grief. Today, Heather lives far from the spotlight, exhibiting her pottery around the world while remaining largely anonymous by design. She doesn't trade on the McCartney name or cash in on her association with the Beatles for publicity. Her life is quiet, intentional, and deeply personal. Heather was the child Paul chose in the middle of chaos, but his next daughter was born directly into it. Chapter 2. Mary McCartney. Mary was born in August 1969, the same year her parents, Paul and Linda, got married, against the backdrop of the Beatles quietly falling apart. Mary's earliest years unfolded against a backdrop of endings, the dissolution of the band that defined an era, and a father trying to reinvent himself while holding a young family together. Just like Heather, Mary also followed in her mother's creative footsteps and developed a love for photographing people. One of Mary's most vivid childhood memories wasn't a concert or a studio session. It was standing in her mother's Soho dark room, watching an image slowly emerge on blank white paper. She later described that moment as magical, the instant she understood that photography wasn't about fame, but patience. The exact opposite of her father's career, where everything was happening at once. That mindset shaped the trajectory of Mary's life. As Mary grew older, she made a deliberate decision to stand behind the camera rather than in front of it. Her work began appearing in publications like Vogue, GQ, and The Sunday Times, not because of her surname, but because of her eye. In 2015, she was selected to photograph Queen Elizabeth II, to mark the monarch becoming the longest reigning ruler in British history. This assignment cemented her reputation as a serious photographer and helped her shape her own identity. But Mary's relationship with legacy is more complex than that. In 2020, she photographed her father alongside Taylor Swift for a Rolling Stone cover, a full-circle moment layered with history. The moment is special because Linda McCartney was the first female photographer to ever shoot a Rolling Stone cover back in 1968. For Mary, there was no better way to honor both her parents. That same instinct carried into film. In 2022, Mary directed If These Walls Could Sing, a documentary about Abbey Road Studios. On the surface, it's the history of a legendary building. Beneath that, it's something more personal. A daughter creating space for conversations with her father that might never have happened otherwise. Mary has said the project allowed her to hear stories Paul had kept inside for years and memories he hadn't revisited aloud. Outside of photography and film, Mary carries forward another part of her mother's legacy: food. A passionate advocate for vegetarian cooking, she has authored multiple plant-based cookbooks and hosted Mary McCartney Serves It Up, an Emmy-nominated Food Network series rooted in warmth rather than performance. Paul himself appears on the show, stripped of all pretenses, just a father enjoying the company of his daughter. Now a mother of 4, Mary has built a life that mirrors her values. And while her work often intersects with her father's world, it never depends on it. Mary McCartney didn't inherit fame, she carved out her own space in the world. Then you have McCartney's third daughter, who challenged her father's legacy in ways that even he hadn't imagined. Chapter 3. Stella McCartney. Born in London in 1971 to Paul and Linda, Stella entered a world where expectations formed before identity ever could. From a young age, she understood that her surname would open doors, but her own worth would constantly be questioned. Stella's childhood was nomadic and unconventional. She spent much of her early life on the road as her parents toured with Wings, absorbing a worldview shaped by creativity, independence, and strong ethical values. But while music defined her household, fashion became her solace. By age 12, she was already designing her own clothes. This wasn't just her way of playing around, though, because Stella knew that this was what she wanted to do for the rest of her life. At 16, Stella secured a coveted internship with Christian Lacroix in Paris, an early signal that her ambitions were serious. She later studied at Central St. Martin's in London, one of the world's most demanding fashion schools. But even there, scrutiny followed her. Stella has admitted she felt constantly judged. Her peers, she was Paul McCartney's rich, privileged daughter who breezed her way through life. If anything, this made Stella all the more determined to prove to everyone that she was more than that. Her breakthrough came in 1997, when, at just 26 years old, Stella was appointed creative director of Chloe. The appointment sparked immediate skepticism. Critics openly questioned whether her last name carried her there. But Stella responded the only way she could, through her work. During her tenure, she tripled the brand's sales and won the VH1/Vogue Designer of the Year award. When she stepped away in 2001, it was clear that she wanted to move on to bigger things and have full ownership of her work. That same year, she launched her own eponymous label and made a radical choice that would define her career.
She launched her brand in 2001, pioneering animal-free and eco-friendly fashion.
Stella McCartney refused to use leather, fur, or animal byproducts in her designs. At the time, ethical luxury fashion was not a trend. In fact, it was a risk. Stella inherited her vegetarianism and environmental consciousness directly from Linda, but she translated those values into a commercial model that forced the industry to pay attention. She set new standards for fashion, and that gamble paid off big time. Today, the Stella McCartney brand is one of the most influential names in global fashion, spanning clothing, beauty, fragrance, and menswear. Her designs have been worn by everyone from runway models to world leaders. Another defining moment of her career came in 2018 when she designed Meghan Markle's wedding reception dress, a moment that perfectly mirrors her sister photographing the Queen.
Conscious consumption is at the core of everything. If the people that make the business decisions know that the next generation of consumers will not stand for anything less than, responsible business, then they're going to have to do it anyway. So
that year was big for Stella because it was also when she reclaimed full ownership of her company, buying back shares from Kering, a move that reaffirmed her independence. Beyond fashion, Stella also founded the Stella McCartney Cares Foundation, supporting breast cancer awareness and sustainability, causes deeply tied to her mother's legacy. In 2022, she was formally honored by Queen Elizabeth II for her contributions to fashion and environmental advocacy. Now, in her early 50s, Stella balances her career with family life. She has been married to Alastair Willis since 2003. And together they have 4 children. Despite her global influence, she speaks openly about privilege, calling herself one of the first Nepo babies, while insisting that opportunity only matters if you do something meaningful with it. And boy, did she do that and more. Then we have the McCartney child, who chose the path that was the riskiest of them all. Chapter 4. James McCartney. James is Paul's namesake and the only son, and you can imagine what that kind of pressure might do to a person. Born James Louis McCartney in 1977 to Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney, he entered a world where music defined everything in his life. And from the outside, the expectation seemed obvious. If any McCartney child was going to follow directly in Paul's footsteps, it would be James. That assumption became his burden. James grew up during the Wings era, traveling with his parents, surrounded by instruments, studios, and musicians long before he could fully understand what any of it meant. But what most people don't know is that music wasn't introduced to him as a destiny. It was just there. When Paul gave him his first guitar at age 9, it wasn't a symbolic passing of the torch. It was a father sharing something he loved with his son. But the world wouldn't see it that way. At school, James learned quickly that his surname came with consequences. He later admitted to being bullied, singled out for who he was. Then came the nicknames, the unwarranted attention, and the absolute disappearance of any kind of privacy. While his sisters found refuge in other things, James gravitated toward the one arena where comparison was unavoidable: music. In his teenage years and early 20s, James struggled to find balance. His mother's death hit him especially hard. In later interviews, James openly acknowledged that he spiraled after her death, becoming estranged from parts of his family and drifting into substance abuse. Unlike the polished narratives often attached to famous families, this period was messy, painful, and deeply human. James went to rehab, But music is what really healed him, and so he decided to pursue it professionally, regardless of the baggage that came with it. James's first professional experience was working alongside his father, rather than announcing himself as a solo artist. He played guitar and drums on Paul's Flaming Pie album and contributed to Driving Rain, even co-writing songs. These were apprenticeships where James learned the discipline of recording, arranging, and collaboration from the inside, without ever being pushed to the front. Still, people had only one question on their mind. Could he do it on his own? In 2010, James released his first EP, Available Light. It wasn't flashy, and he wasn't marketed as the next big thing. In fact, his work only revealed him as a songwriter drawn to melody, introspection, and restraint. A year later came Close at Hand, followed by his debut full-length album, Me, in 2013. The title felt deliberate, almost defiant. Paul co-produced the album and contributed backing vocals to one track. But James made it clear this wasn't a Beatles revival. And the critics definitely noted that James wasn't trying to follow his father's footsteps, whether it came to his songwriting style or his voice. His second album, The Blackberry Train, released in 2016, leaned darker and heavier, reflecting a man still working through identity rather than celebrating it. And then, something unexpected happened. James stepped back. For years, he remained largely out of the public eye. While his sisters built highly visible empires, James chose obscurity, a rare move for someone with every possible advantage to do the opposite. He focused on personal growth, creativity, and quiet persistence. Then, in 2024, James re-emerged with the same kind of passion that he initially showed. He released new music, including Primrose Hill, a collaboration with Sean Ono Lennon. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. The sons of two men whose partnership defined modern songwriting coming together decades later. But the song wasn't a gimmick. It was understated, reflective, and grounded. It focused on the two musicians acknowledging history without being trapped by it. Later that year, James released his third album, Beautiful Nothing. Nearly a decade after his last record, it felt less like a comeback and more like a continuation, proof that he had never stopped creating, only stopped explaining himself. Today, James McCartney remains something of an outlier in his family. He rarely gives interviews. When he does speak, he returns to the same theme. He refuses to be oppressed by expectation. He makes music because he needs to, not because anyone expects him to. Considering all of this, Paul McCartney's youngest daughter might surprise you with her complete rejection of the life that shaped everyone around her. Chapter 5. Beatrice McCartney. Every McCartney child had to negotiate with fame in some way, but Beatrice McCartney chose to avoid it altogether. Born in October 2003, Beatrice arrived at a point in Paul McCartney's life that looked nothing like the world his older children grew up in. The Beatles were long over. Stadium tours were no longer the center of his daily life. And Paul, now in his 60s, had already lived several lifetimes before becoming a father again. Beatrice's mother was Heather Mills, Paul's second wife. Their relationship was controversial from the start, relentlessly scrutinized by tabloids and public opinion. But for all the chaos that surrounded the marriage, one thing remained consistent. Both parents were fiercely protective of their daughter. For Heather Mills, Beatrice was a miracle. After multiple miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies, Heather had been told she might never be able to carry a child to term. Beatrice's birth defied those expectations. Paul and Heather announced her arrival with pride. But almost immediately, they made a choice that separated Beatrice's upbringing from every other McCartney child before her. Privacy would come first. That decision only intensified after Paul and Heather separated in 2006, and finalized their divorce in 2008. The split was bitter and highly public, but Beatrice was kept almost entirely out of it. While headlines raged, her image rarely appeared. There were no red carpets, staged appearances, or public interviews. Heather Mills later said she considered this her greatest success as a parent, shielding her daughter from the celebrity lifestyle entirely. Paul, for his part, embraced fatherhood differently this time. Gone was the whirlwind of tours and studio marathons that defined his earlier parenting years. Instead, he became something far more ordinary and far more intentional. He drove Beatrice to school himself. He chatted with other parents at the school gates. He attended school events without an entourage. In interviews, Paul said that he loved every second of it and felt like a different dad with Beatrice. That difference really mattered. Beatrice grew up seeing her father not as a cultural icon, but as someone who packed lunches, helped with homework, and read bedtime stories. There were no expectations placed on her to perform, create, or continue anything. If legacy existed in her household, it wasn't something she was asked to inherit. The rare glimpses the public did get were telling. In 2011, Beatrice appeared as a flower girl at Paul's wedding to his third wife, Nancy Chevelle. She was 7 years old, dressed simply, smiling shyly. Beyond that, the paparazzi had little to work with because there was nothing to chase. What is known about Beatrice comes almost entirely from her mother's rare comments. Heather Mills has described her daughter as deeply creative, particularly with words. She has called her a brilliant poet, noting that she likely inherited that gift from her father. Heather also taught Beatrice how to play the saxophone, an instrument none of her siblings pursued, because while Beatrice avoided fame, she didn't avoid her gift of creativity. But perhaps the most defining detail is also the simplest. Beatrice doesn't want the spotlight. Heather has said openly that her daughter hates fame and the whole limelight thing. Unlike her siblings, who all found ways to exist publicly on their own terms, Beatrice initially wanted to become a marine biologist and live a life far away from the cameras and record charts, and that choice speaks volumes about her. Beatrice grew up watching how fame shaped narratives around her family, the grief after Linda McCartney's death, the pressure placed on her older siblings, and the scrutiny surrounding her parents' divorce. And instead of engaging with that world, she simply opted out. Now, in her early 20s, Beatrice remains largely unknown by design. There are no public projects to analyze, no interviews to quote, no curated persona to decode. And that absence is precisely the point. In a family defined by cultural impact, Beatrice represents the possibility that legacy doesn't always need to be continued, defended, or transformed. Sometimes it can simply be left behind. Each one of Paul McCartney's children found their own way to live with, reshape, or step away from one of the most famous legacies in history. Which of their lives fascinates you the most? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.